we can't have perfect data.
Yeah.
What we can do is mitigate certain biased decisions by making sure that our data is high quality.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Iron Ring. I'm Alexandra, a civil engineering student. And in today's episode, we'll be diving into the world of AI and deep learning by exploring the ethics and impacts of these technologies. So joining us today is Seynabou, who, if I was in the United States, I would consider her a software engineer, but in Canada, she is a computer scientist at SAMA, and she is the Montreal City Lead for Women in AI. So welcome, Seynabou, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Do you mind explaining the whole software engineer versus computer scientist, the title that you have?
Yeah, so basically if you talk with some other colleagues at Concordia who are like studying software engineering, it can be a bit annoying because all the classes they take has to be taught by an engineer. And for computer scientists, it doesn't really matter. You can just take the classes. And when you're done with your engineering degree, I believe you have to take a test to officially have the title of engineer. And that's basically how it goes here in Quebec. And things are a little bit more loose in the United States. And the company that I work for is an American company with offices in Montreal, which is why they feel okay with giving people who studied computer science the title of software engineer, even though a Quebec company or a company that was originally from Montreal would have like not done that, just another role.
I think that's really interesting to note just because not a lot of people know that. But yeah, so as we're, like we said, we're going to be discussing a lot about today deep learning and especially kind of deep fakes and the AI bias, which are two pretty big things going on right now in terms of what's things that are being created that are not ethical by, I guess, taking advantage of these technologies. So why do you believe it's important to discuss the ethics of technology and focus on these kind of matters of AI?
Well, to start, I feel like the topic of ethics should be discussed regardless which technology we're talking about and just in everyday decisions. We've been doing it for a lot of older technologies. I mean, there's a lot of politics around the use of nuclear energy, for example, or just things like sustainability and cars that are being regulated for how many emissions they're putting. So I think it should be just the same for any other technology, even though it's a little bit less tangible like AI. But I think it's really important because AI is growing quickly and it's affecting a lot of different aspects of our everyday lives. And a lot of people are affected by it, sometimes positively and sometimes negatively, sadly enough. So due to that, it's really important to make sure that it's regulated and that we talk about the ethics of AI to make sure that the people who are currently using AI and taking advantage of it are not taking advantage of the population at the same time. So
no, absolutely. And we've already seen people taking advantage of these kind of technologies. And there's a lot more potential for it to go. Like deepfakes, especially when I first heard about them, they kind of give you an eerie feeling just because there's a lot of political manipulation that can be done too, in terms of, I guess, manipulating, say someone manipulated Joe Biden's footage and he declared war on a country. Like that in itself is just incredibly dangerous. And as well, just like we said, like the bias of technology can also have an impact on people as well. So I agree with you that it should be more talked about as well. And so that's kind of like a basis on why we're having this discussion today. I also wanted to bring up, because I did read an article earlier this month, and it was how Alexa, so a little girl was talking to Alexa and she said, "Alexa, give me a challenge." And Alexa said, take your phone charger and plug it into the outlet halfway and then take a penny and touch it to the prongs. And this, the mother of this child, she was obviously brought this to the public and stuff like that. And it kind of made me wonder, because Alexa didn't really have this filter on this challenge was actually a TikTok challenge. So it was super popular on the internet. So Alexa, I guess, chose the most popular thing and sent it to her. So I wanted to ask you, how is AI trained then? Is it okay, here's what's the most popular, so the AI takes the most popular stuff, or how exactly do we train AI?
Well, I guess it depends on what kinds of AIs you're looking into, but it all boils down to data. We just need to feed data to a model, and essentially what we're supposed to do is validate the data by testing it. So basically keeping a portion of the data that was not fed into it, so new data, and making the model make estimations to test the validity of the model. And there should be steps of iterations where you are adjusting the model to make sure that things are going well, because you test out with real world data and see how it goes. And there should be steps where you just audit it and look at how it goes. But when it comes to, I haven't heard about this incident. I'm really surprised, honestly, but I think it's just it could be a Google search. And for those things, I think it's just about, it's hard to say. I wouldn't be able to know exactly how Alexa chose, answer to those questions. But I think for some parts, it's just about parsing what the person has inputted and then eventually just returning results from a search.
Okay, so is there a way to train the AI to, I guess, develop a sense of what's right and what's wrong, or there's no really...
The AI is just, it's not able to really think.
Okay.
Because you're asking for a challenge, it gives you a challenge that's currently popular.
Yeah, it did what it was asked.
Exactly.
But...
It doesn't have the capacity to basically think, well, doing this will harm that person, so maybe not. Maybe one thing that could have prevented something like this is basically not promoting those kinds of challenges in the first place. At this point, it's all about monitoring content and better education, I think.
Yeah, okay. So it's really, right now, it's not, you would say it's not really plausible for AI to be trained, like you said, to think for itself too. I know Amazon is now looking into it, so I don't know exactly what they're planning on doing. But like you're saying, if there is like kind of a difficulty in the AI itself determining what's right and wrong, then that is also an issue. Is it ethical that they put that out on the market with it being able to tell people these kinds of things?
Yeah.
Should it have gone through more testing? Or
one thing that could have helped was basically having more trustworthy data. So doing some form of pre-processing work before feeding in. And because, for example, if you ask certain problematic questions, or I'm sorry if I bring up this topic, but if you try to ask a question on Google that involves self-harming, they're going to identify that and warn you not to do it. They'll put a helpline for to support people, because they don't want people to harm themselves. So that there has been some work done by like the Google team and some other search engines to make sure that certain questions don't pass through certain filters.
Yeah, keywords that makes it trigger a warning notice or something, like you said. Right now, I know like things like Facebook, and that if you even say the word COVID, it's going to have a, if you want information on COVID, please click here. So yeah, that in itself, I think there's more work to be done there if that was an incident that happened. But I guess that kind of gave us an idea on how AI is currently being trained. And I mean, I was reading an article too on, it was actually an AI debating its own ethics. So they had an AI debate for and against AI in the ethical domain on is it ethical, is it not? So the AI came up with this quote, and it said, "There's no such thing as a good AI, only good and bad humans. We are not smart enough to make AI ethical." Have you heard of this?
I haven't heard of it, but I mean, it's pretty true.
Yeah.
It is just a tool, honestly. And it's all about how it's being used.
Yeah. Okay. So you agree with that quote, and that, so would you say that it's not, is it reasonable to say that we can never make AI unbiased? Will it always have some sort of bias, some sort of bad to it?
Good question. I personally feel like it's impossible to create AI that is unbiased, because even the human brain is filled with biases, and the whole way our memory works, some of our thinking processes are strongly linked to a bias. So basically, I guess the difference between a good decision and a biased decision, I guess, is just whether or not the outcome is something that you wanted. Because, for example, on myself, if I'm driving and there's a patch of snow or something, I will slow down a little because I'm biased enough to think that there might be ice under it.
Yeah.
But this is a good bias, let's say, because it's just due to past experience. And I know to do better. If you have an AI model that is trained with bad data, it's just going to look at that historical data or just the data itself to make a decision, identify patterns, and do something. We can't have perfect data.
Yeah.
What we can do is mitigate certain biased decisions by making sure that our data is high quality. But I think getting rid of biases completely is kind of like telling a person to think in a more perfect way. It's all about the data you're inputting in it. So,
and all of our data is biased because, like you said, humans can, just as humans can't be unbiased either. We all have our biases and we all have something. So yes, the data will be biased as well. So then if we can't guarantee unbiased AI, and there's always going to be maybe some data out there that's skewing the way that the AI gives its output. So then how can we best combat AI biases so they don't discriminate against people, especially in serious matters? How can we be sure, since, like you said, it's all about the data, right? So
ensuring that the data itself is diverse, because sometimes you can have high quality data, but it doesn't cover different cases. So it can be something that is like simple, like feeding data into a smart car model.
Okay, yeah.
And you're only feeding data about a very urban area, and then wondering why the data is not doing well when it's in a more rural area. So I think that's one thing to look into. Or in medtechs, for some image recognition software that's supposed to identify, for example, skin cancer. If you're training the data with people who have fairer skin, for example, then you might end up giving false negative, not identifying cancer cells in a person who has a darker skin tone. Because that is currently something that is problematic at the moment in a lot of medtechs. Some of their data sets are not diverse enough just yet, and even the field of medicine itself, not like just the AI part, has some problems with lack of diversity in what they are teaching doctors and all of the images that people are using to identify symptoms of different things. So they are working on it. I know a lot of young professionals right now are trying to bridge that gap to make sure that things are just a little bit more inclusive. And same goes with the AI. If we get more inclusive and more representation in our data sets, whether it's about actual data for people or things like whatever we're feeding to a smart car, it can help mitigate those biases.
But would you say that, I guess, diversifying, say, the software engineering or computer science industry, would that also help? Is there a bias that comes from them as well when developing?
Definitely. If I'm developing a software that does facial recognition and I notice that it has a problem recognizing my face, I'm probably going to raise it. Or if I'm looking at a data set and I don't see myself in any of the pictures used, I might raise the issue. And it's not just about ethnic differences. It can also be with people who, for example, have skin conditions. They are marginalized communities that are underrepresented often. So we really need not only have more diversity, but just including more people in some of these discussions and getting more points of views. It's really those underrepresented groups that need to have a bigger voice. And one thing that definitely helps a lot is by having representation within those development teams.
Okay. So it's what could happen is, say you're not an underrepresented, you're not part of an underrepresented group. So you might not think or might not see what this technology isn't seeing either. So it's kind of like you said, people with skin conditions, it's not something, if say I go and it's looking at your skin, it'll say, okay, good, yes, I recognize you, things like that. But in my head, I'm not thinking, oh, what about people with skin conditions? What about other things that I've never experienced in my life? You know, I wouldn't think of that. So I guess that too, it's not like people are being malicious. It's that you're just don't have the experience. So how would you know?
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
So it is about bringing more perspectives to the table, because otherwise things go unnoticed. And then, like we said, things get sent to the market without it being tested in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be, first of all, can discriminate against certain populations, but also it can endanger people too, because, I mean, depending how you're using the AI, it could be really not in favor of those people.
Yeah.
So I see where it's both the data and the developers, where we have to kind of get the perspectives to find all these gaps. And not
smartwatches often don't work on people with darker complexions because of the green light technology they're using. Melanin usually absorbs the green light. And in fact, there's this one AI startup in Montreal that is actually working on a vital sign tracker. So it's just using AI to monitor your vitals and give alerts and make sure that people are safe and get the treatment they need in time. So what they're doing right now is ensuring that marginalized communities are covered well. So basically getting as diverse of a data set as possible, not just people with darker complexions, but also suppose someone has eczema or like skin rashes and whatnot, just making sure that they do well. And I really love the work they're doing. And the CEO is actually part of Women in AI as well. She's part of the Montreal team, and she's great. Honestly.
At least there are people, and like we said, diverse people who understand the issue, who are actually doing something about it. So, and I guess you were talking about too how we need to regulate these kind of technologies, especially because right now they're very prevalent, and it's really easy to get them out to the public. And we know this is for anything. If people aren't governed, they're gonna do unethical things, like something as simple as, say, you're in class and you're doing an exam and a teacher walks out, the students are going to start cheating, right? Like a significant portion of students will cheat. So we know that there is this correlation that when not governed, you feel more comfortable doing something that's not probably in the most ethical interest. So we absolutely do need to regulate our technology. However, technology seems to be evolving exponentially, but governments aren't keeping up. And I think the biggest thing that I saw example of this was when Mark Zuckerberg faced the Facebook antitrust lawsuit. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about as you're smiling. And he had to testify before Congress. So in the end, Zuckerberg was having to explain all these basic terms to them. Even how he makes money on Facebook. They didn't understand how do ads make you money. So in that case, like, I want to get your opinion in what chance do we have if we did implement laws and we did regulate it, what chance do we have to making a difference if we're so behind on every advancement, and then governments are so behind on what's coming out?
I feel like right now younger generations understand some problems with AI, but it hasn't reached some policymakers just yet. So it's a question of just education, and some organizations are trying to do something about it. There are some for-profit companies that try to change things by implementing ethical AI and raise awareness about certain issues. And there's also non-for-profit ones like CFAR, which is a Canadian research center.
Okay.
And they're actually working on an AI toolkit for policymakers. So it's just a cool toolkit that people in the government can look into and try to understand what AI is and what dangers might happen or how beneficial it can be for society. Because I think we're talking a lot about the negative sides, but obviously it is a tool just like any other. It's about who is using it. So yeah, I think it's nice that there is some wave of change where people are trying to educate people more. And yeah, I'm a bit more hopeful on that. I don't know if we can really regulate AI. Innovation is always great. It's really about looking at intention and intent. I am more concerned, to be honest, about who owns the AI than the AI itself.
Okay.
Right now, if we look at it, the people leading the researchers are like big tech companies.
Okay.
And it makes sense because you need a lot of money, a lot of resources to be able to build an AI model and launch it. So it's people who already have a lot of power and a lot of financial power. And they're just getting more powerful because they're taking an unfair advantage over other groups. So I think that's one thing that's worth regulating. And it's no longer really a question about ethics behind the AI itself, which I believe is still important, but it's more economical. It's more about power balances and how those groups are essentially using AI to widen the equality gap.
We should also be putting our resources towards educating people on maybe how to tell the difference of a deep fake or how to better, I guess, like we said, train technology with the data and just kind of educate people on what it is. And like you said, I know deep fake or like something like that kind of could sound a little like scary, like, oh my God, you can manipulate anything I do. But also we've seen it do good things. Like I think a famous one is with Star Wars, like after Carrie Fisher died, they used AI and kind of, I guess, took all the data from all her movies. I don't know exactly if it was just Star Wars movies or anything, but all her actions and her mouth movements and things like that, and they turned her kind of to look very realistic. So it is beneficial in a way. And they're also talking about doing dubbing for movies instead of the person's mouth moving and it doesn't match what's being said when you dub different languages. So it can be beneficial, like we said, and it's not
it's always nice. It's a bit more interesting to look into that side of like AI and how it can be scary. There are definitely some scary things with deepfakes, but I feel like it's just going to continue affecting people the same way similar technologies have been affecting the same people.
Yeah.
People are going to use the deepfakes to scam, and usually it's going to be people who are usually older and a little bit more susceptible to some of these scams. So scam calls have been super efficient, scam emails, scams using deepfakes are going to continue to affect those people still. And it's unfortunate because the stakes are a little bit less high, they might not have the support that, for example, a politician would have to basically get rid of a smear campaign. But individuals who are targeted are very susceptible for it. So that's really unfortunate. But I mean, again, I wouldn't see it as any different as photoshopping the picture of someone to slender them and to make them seem less credible or less or just shaming a person. So it's unfortunate, but it's just how it is.
It's just I guess it's the evolution too, because Photoshop, when it first came out, I'm sure it was very believable, but as you come to learn it, a lot of people who even aren't professionals in Photoshop can detect Photoshop. They'll say, no, that looks Photoshop. That's not right. That looks off or something like that. Or people can even tell like when someone's been like airbrushed or anything like that. So even that, I guess we could say that eventually over time we'll come to kind of
detect them.
Detect them and be more questionable about what we see. But is there actually a way to trace back a deep fake to like its history, or how would, because I know I said like the FBI was looking into being able to detect deep fakes, and I think they were talking about how they could I guess retrace where the deep fake came from, but do you know more about that kind of
I don't know much about it. I just know that there's some form of signature or what's the word, fingerprint
Oh, okay.
for deepfakes.
Yeah.
So there are tools that are being worked on, and some of them are working. I don't know exactly how well they're working, but I know that there is a way to know if a video has been generated through deepfake.
Okay.
So there are more sophisticated tools out there, but it is true that for some of them as well, you can detect it directly with just the human eye.
Yeah. So for the layperson, probably not as easy to detect, but at least I guess if something was like a criminal like a video that's incriminating to someone, at least like law enforcement can retrace it. It's not the end all of our video sharing culture. What I was reading too is and doing that is that it's so easy, like I said, to share all this content. And actually Section 230 of the United States Code says that online media, so things like Facebook or social media, they're not responsible for a third party posting something unethical or something not right on their platform. If we can't regulate social media, like I said, it's not easy to tell Mark Zuckerberg he's being sued because someone posted an incriminating video on Facebook. Do you think, like, you don't foresee it being, I guess, detrimental?
It's gonna hurt individuals a lot. Some people might share fake news, but just teaching how to look at information is the way to go. We don't want people to be naive and to share things without looking it up first.
Yes.
So it's about a change in the behavior, because the new tools are going to continue happening just in the same way we continue trusting pictures despite the fact that photoshopping and everything is super like accessible. I don't think the fact that deepfakes are getting more accessible is going to make videos less trustable either.
Yeah. And so what other ethical factors are there for AI or other than what we've been talking about today?
Well, one thing to take into consideration is the source of the AI. Because as I mentioned, AI is just as strong as the data you're feeding into it.
Yeah.
And I think sourcing training data in an ethical way is something that people, well, big companies should do. And well, the company I'm currently working for, Sama, prides itself in delivering quality training data that is sourced ethically. Because a lot of companies are trying to take advantage of cheaper labor to annotate data, which is a really repetitive and not really fulfilling work, and they're paying them little to nothing to do all of that annotation for hours, which is why Sama is actually giving respectable work and living wages to people from underserved communities, and they're practicing something called impact hiring. They want to make sure that the people they're hiring are given a lot of training, fair wages, so which is like usually more than what the government considered a living wage, and they want people to get the skills necessary to continue outside of Sama. So they don't want them to just do data annotation forever. They're teaching them English skills, how to do presentations, some basic IT skills, and they really want people to get whatever they need to take a step ahead and actually be raised out of poverty. So they're really focusing on hiring people who can have a positive impact in their communities, especially single mothers, because they have like families to care for. And especially in the countries that are currently involved in, women are usually the pillar of like their communities. So they know that by empowering those women, they can in their turn empower people around them. So we, like, Sama wants to create a new standard of training data, and it's working because a lot of big tech companies trust Sama to get their data because it's higher quality, there are less errors, and you know that it's helping people. So you're getting the data you need, but you're also like your money is helping someone else. So that's always really nice. And
I think that's well, first of all, that's fantastic. Definitely this kind of, not only you're here to work, but your work, but also you're getting mentoring and you're getting extra resources. So that's how we keep the good people in this industry, the good people who know what they're doing. But I think it's fascinating to kind of see it that, just like you would ethically source your clothes or ethically source your food or something like that, you're ethically sourcing data and I think that's even like
the
you
team
said,
is growing, honestly.
Yeah.
We're doing a lot of hiring at the moment.
That's
so
great.
I'm happy to see that we are gonna be able to impact a lot of people positively, well, thanks to all of the support and trust that people are placing into Sama.
That's great. And that's encouraging too, to know that there are people who aren't taking advantage, especially for someone like me who's really not well versed in like AI and things like that. I'm a civil engineering student. I don't really look too much into that. So it's encouraging to know that there are people there that can make the difference where I can't. So, I mean, kudos and to Sama and to yourself for working on things like this, and ensuring that these technologies don't become something that can really, like I said, for the lack of a better word, destroy people's lives. But on that note, what is one thing you would like for our audience to take away from this discussion?
Things are not okay. Humans are becoming unemployable, and not because robots are taking our jobs. It's not about that. It's just that it's not necessary anymore. We have the means to make sure that people are fed and that people are not suffering and struggling in certain situations. We're just not doing it. All of the resources are being allocated by specific groups, and I think that's really the one thing that I want to work on. People are not really afraid of AI stealing their jobs or AI ruining how things are. I think the main problem is that AI is allowing people to continue doing things the same way they've been doing it for years. So
I guess people have become too comfortable with how things are going so far and not, like you said, questioning or thinking on other people's perspectives or other gaps in the society that we're not looking after. So I think that's a great takeaway. Especially, it's just there's an ethical side to everything, and especially in this era, we're becoming very much a society dependent on technology. So it's important for us to not take advantage of it and not do it in the wrong way, but make sure we're doing it in the right way.
There's this one quote that was shared by Sean Cooney from the Technology Sandbox at Concordia. I don't know if you've ever visited that place. It's really great.
But I've heard of it.
But the quote, he got it from, I don't remember where he got the quote from, but it's essentially the difference between a utopia and a dystopia is who owns the technology. And it speaks so much to me, and I love it, and it's true. When you have technology and power and you're using it to help the public, you get less food waste and some other things. But when you're using it for profit, what you get is smart cars that are helping a small portion of this population and public transit systems that are just weak. So I think it's really, really interesting to see things that way.
So educate the current generation that's coming up into these fields that there's a more beautiful way of using this technology and helping everyone and not just making profits. But so on that note, I think that was a good wrap up and a great takeaway to the discussion we had. And thank you so much again for joining us on this episode and having this really great discussion. And thank you to our audience for tuning in today. And we'll see you on the next episode of The Iron Ring.